Hi there, my name is Mohkam Singh, 25 years old. I was born and raised in Brisbane and I belong to the Sikh faith. So I am a practicing Sikh and I follow the teachings of Guru Nanak Dev Ji. My family first arrived in Australia around the 1890s by the name of Sardar Heera Singh. Sardar Heera Singh is my great-grandfather. So he's my dad's mother's father. So that's how far back we can link to Australia. And he came out in the 1890s for work reasons. India was still under the British rule. So a lot of people at that time were traveling to Australia from India for work reasons. My family come from Punjab, so that's the northwest India. It's a state sort of towards the Pakistan and India border. He came out here on a ship. What I've been told from my family members, in particular my grandmother Surinder Kaur and her brother Jaswinder Thakkar, were the main people, and my father Ranjit Singh, who have given me a good idea of where the history comes from. They explained it that there was an agreement between India and Australia at that time where Australians would provide horses to the Indian army, and in return, in India and Punjab at that time, they would create ute, so I think sort of carts, and that was a sort of trade at that time in particular. So based off that, relations were quite good, and it was a common thing at that time in Punjab that many people would go to Australia for work reasons. And the work that my ancestor Heera Singh did at that time, what I've been told, was more hawking and also working in the agricultural section, so in the farms in particular. We don't have any information as to whereabouts he came in the 1890s. What we've been told is that he's travelled around Australia. When I did a little bit of research as to where the Indians and the people of Punjab did the hawking, it was sort of from the main cities, and then they would go into sort of rural, regional sort of farming areas within Australia to provide those goods. In total, he did 3 trips to Australia. He came for 10 to 12 years, went back, and then did another expedition, came back, and he did 3 tours in total until his death in 1933. He was in India when he passed. He was actually planning his next trip out, and I think he sort of enjoyed Australia by that time. He was looking forward to going back, but unfortunately then he had passed away in Punjab in India in 1933. He definitely left an impression on his son and his family, who would then eventually carry that on, and they were the sort of next family members of mine who then came to Australia afterwards. Heera Singh, my great-grandfather, he had no family or anything, any ties like that. It would all have been very new, different languages, just a different scenery, different everything in all aspects, just from the lifestyle he was living in India to the work he was doing in Australia. At that time, the currency was actual gold. My grandfather told me that he had actually done so well in his farming and his hawking when he was here that he actually brought 10,000 pounds worth of gold back to India. He didn't own any farms when he came here. He was working on the farms and doing hawking as well. We have always been farmers in Punjab and India, so my forefathers, my ancestors were always farmers. With that, naturally he had that farming knowledge already within the blood, within the family. So in that essence, it came quite easy to him to sort of pick it up in Australia as well, because of the British rule at that time, and the benefit that the British Empire was getting with that trade between India and Australia. They were supporting that, sending people over. Obviously, essentially, it would benefit them, but I would imagine that they made it easy for my great-great-grandfather to do that trip, earn some money, come back, and then the fact that he did it 2 more times after that as well. In my family, I think Heera Singh is the first person who is a direct relative of mine to actually come to Australia, but he never lived here as per se after that, 1933. So in 1901, obviously we know that Australia had the all-white policy at that time as well. So someone with an Indian background, Punjabi background, Sikh background couldn't live there permanently. There was always a condition they would have to sort of go back. So then Heera Singh passed away in 1933. And then it wasn't until 1949 when his son, Sardar Naranjan Singh, who is my grandmother's uncle, Sardar Heera Singh, who we were talking about, who came in the 1890s, his son, he came out on a trip. And now this is after the Indian partition, when Pakistan and India got created and the British had left India at that time. They had come out to essentially find work. So they were, I think, in the construction background, and they had done a tour out here. I think, in 1949 they came out via ship. They spent 3 to 4 years here. Sardar Naranjan Singh and his brother-in-law, they had come out, and at that time they went back, stayed in India, stayed in Punjab for a little bit, and it wasn't until then my great-grandfather makes his first trip to Australia. So my great-grandfather, Sardar Balwant Singh Takhar, he then came out to Australia. So Sardar Takhar Singh, my great-grandfather, who does end up doing the trip and living and migrating out here, he was part of the British forces at that time in World War II, and his father, Sardar Genda Singh, was part of the Sikh regiment. Him and his brother, both of them, fought for the Sikh regiment in World War I. He was stationed in the Middle East, so he's also my great-grandfather, but he never came to Australia. And he was stationed in the Middle East, and he served there for a total of 17 years. And then the reasoning for comeback was obviously he missed the family and missed Punjab and wanted to come back. And so that's why he left the army then. But one thing my grandmother often talks about highly is that Sardar Genda Singh actually was such a good officer, where he worked up the army ranks to actually become captain. So he's known as Captain Genda Singh. And it's quite a big deal for our family and for the Sikh community as well, because at that time, the British Empire were very reluctant in promoting non-British officers to the highest ranking. So they tended to sort of favor more of the officers from England and then from the United Kingdom with the highest ranks. But Sardar Genda Singh was one of the handful officers who essentially reached the title of captain as well. So we're very proud of that my great-grandfather was able to achieve that. When I think about it, it makes me think of the type of character he would have had to reach such a high level within the army. So I would like to think that he would have been quite a great soldier and a very honourable man to reach that positioning. That's where that sort of military background came from my grandmother's father's side. So then his son, Sardar Balwant Singh Takhar, who then essentially comes to Australia, served in World War II as well. So I don't think he was part of the Sikh regiment, but He also served in World War II as well. Served in the army all the way up until 1947, when the partition happened between India and Punjab. Sardar Balwant Singh Takhar had a good, stable income, and they were fairly comfortable, a comfortable lifestyle. The British at that time offered some retired officers an incentive that in the now Pakistan area there was some land being developed. So essentially there was an incentive where some of the retired officers could purchase land over there and then build a house or buy some land and whatever they would like to do with that. So that was something my great-great-grandfather decided was the best thing to do for the family. They had got themselves, I think it was 25 acres of land in the now Pakistan area. We have to remember that before 1947, all of that area came under Punjab. Before 47, Punjab was a lot bigger, where it covered a wide part of land in India, and then also in the Pakistan area. You'll also find now there's a lot of parts in Pakistan that still speak Punjabi as well, our language. So they had bought that land there, they started living there, and they had a fairly comfortable lifestyle. It wasn't until 1947 then essentially that all changed. So the way my family talks about it and has explained to me is that because my grandfather Sardar Balwant Singh Takhar was in the army, there was sort of unrest within Punjab at that time leading up to 1947, where there was a lot of uncertainty as to what's going to happen, is something going to happen, and what does that mean for us. Essentially there was rumors amongst the community, but no one really had a good idea as to what's going to take place. Sardar Balwant Singh, being in the army, our family would contact him and ask him what's the sort of case, what's happening, and he essentially told them the only information he got, which was there's nothing to worry about. It was only up until 2 days before the actual partition took place is he had to come back. Then they had to get ready for a move to cross over to India. There was a lot of misunderstanding. There was a lot of confusion amongst the community at that time. A lot of the neighbors, a lot of the other community members had started preparing for their travel to India, packing all their things, buying the carts and getting all their things in order for them to pick up, shop and move, spur of the moment. At that point in time, the Sikhs were told that the Sikhs and the Hindus will live in peace together, and hence why they don't need to get their own place. They should come and move towards India and towards that part of Punjab. So Sardar Takhar Singh was in the military up until 1947, and then it was only 2 days before the actual partition happened is when he came back to India, to Punjab. Now, where the family's house was in the Pakistan area, the now Pakistan area, at that time it was all under Punjab, but essentially the British Empire had decided that where they're going to cut the border is where it suited them. They had cut Punjab, our state, into two halves. The name Punjab actually means the land of the five rivers, and the sad thing now is that 2 rivers of Punjab are actually still in Pakistan, and 3 are in now modern day Punjab. So essentially our people were divided. The Sikh community was divided. At that time they were told you had to leave Pakistan border and you had to cross over into what is now modern day Punjab, although they were living in Punjab at that time. what that meant for my family and many other Sikh families was where they were living, where they called home, they could no longer call home. Because my great grandfather was told by other officers, other colleagues within the army that there was nothing to worry about, my family back at home in that Pakistan house essentially didn't do too much preparation in packing up everything last minute and getting ready to start a new life. It was only 2 days before the actual partition day happened that they came back, and they had to quickly get everything sorted as much as they could. Because of obviously just that 2 day period and that mad rush, they missed out on all the good horses, all the good carts, the actual traveling cart that they did manage to get was a very old, rundown one, and they weren't able to get all of their gold, all of their personal belongings, essentially all of their main things to live with. They had to leave everything behind and just take the bare minimums. My grandma often tells me that they literally moved into Punjab, into India, with only the torn clothes they had on their bodies. They had nothing else. They had to start from scratch. They traveled in villages together. It was a very dangerous time when there were a lot of raiders. Some of the Pakistan living, the Muslim raiders were killing the Hindus and the Indians and the Sikhs. And then at the same time, there was a lot of fighting amongst each other and plundering, looting, robbery. It was a massacre for a lot of the people in Punjab. What that meant, because it was a dangerous trip from where they were living to cross the border, they traveled in big groups. So my family traveled in their village group, but then obviously because they had the old worn down wagons and stuff, my grandfather had to send the rest of his family, so his wife, his mother, ahead with the villagers, and he got left behind. What had happened was they managed to get across, the rest of the family, because the women and children were sort of all then protected by other men who had rifles and other means to protect themselves. They managed to get across the border safe and sound. My great-grandfather, Sardar Balwant Singh, unfortunately wasn't able to get with them. He got left behind. So he sent the family, and him and the other driver who was with him of the cart got left behind, and they got ambushed by a group of raiders at that time, and unfortunately the person with him also got killed. But with his military background and experience, he was able to survive that. My father often tells me that my great-grandfather, Sardar Balwant Singh, who we know in our family as Papaji would never ever talk about his experiences in the war or what he had to do during the partition days. We can only really imagine the hardships that he had to go through. And the little bits of knowledge we do have is that when he was able to escape from that ambush, he spent several days in hiding. At day he would have to hide, and then at night he would have to slowly make his way on foot to India. Eventually he was able to cross the border safe and sound, and he managed to get to one of the refugee camps. But the rest of the family thought that he got left behind and thought that he had got killed. They weren't aware that he had survived. And it was only several months later that he finally got to make it to the house, the home. There was a lot of confusion at that time. They were treated just as refugees. They had no home. Everything got left behind. So they stayed in refugee camps for a little bit. And then the Indian government announced that all the families should go back to their ancestral homes. From there, they were just allotted empty houses, because at that same time, the Muslim families then had to leave that part of Punjab. And the way they had decided to treat it all was whatever the empty houses were near your ancestral home, then that would get allotted to you. So then they were assigned a house. So rest of the family then were given a small house. And then many months later, then my great-grandfather finally got his way and traveled back to the house, and he just rocked up to the house. Everyone had assumed that he had passed away at that time. It wasn't easy from then on, because pretty much they had to start everything, their whole life from scratch. My great-grandfather, Papaji, he tried many different jobs. Firstly, obviously having a military background, that was going to be the first thing he would do. But then now we're talking about post-partition days, where it's now an Indian currency. There's no longer a British pound. At that time, then the wages weren't even half of what he was earning before. Pretty much just bare minimum, and it just wasn't sustainable for their family, which meant that my grandfather Papaji, he had to then look for other means of work, because they lost everything. Even just getting meals, my grandmother talks about that they would have to go to other relatives who would have to help him out in times of need. He tried his best in getting different roles. He did a police course and tried doing that for about a year or so, but found that wasn't sustainable. He also did a short stint as a taxi driver in Punjab, just as a means of providing for the family. So he tried this here and there, but they were struggling for a solid means of work. At that time, then, my great-grandfather Papaji, Sardar Balwant Singh, his brother-in-law, so my grandmother's uncle, had just done his first trip back from Australia. They had managed to get a job at a company in Brisbane, and so they had a job. They came back to India and they pitched this idea to my great-grandfather that maybe you should look at coming with us when we go back to Australia. He thought that, you know what, I've tried lots of other things to get us back to where we were, and maybe I need to do this. Then it was decided that they go to Australia solely for a means to provide for their family. My great-grandfather then, they set out to Australia in 1952, and they caught a ship from Calcutta, which then went and stopped in Perth. Then from there, the ship went to Melbourne. Then they had to stay in a hostel at that time. They stayed in the Melbourne city for a couple of weeks. And then from there, then they travelled to Brisbane, then where my great-grandfather's brother-in-law had a job here. So it was actually in a company here in Salisbury. My great-grandfather Papaji was then able to get a job as a forklift driver for that company. He did that for a little bit. It was stable income for him. They lived in a small house here in Salisbury, small tight rooms. After a while, then my Papaji's brother-in-law's wife then came along, and so there's a few that sort of came along from Punjab, and in the small house he actually slept at the outside room as well, solely for just to give the couple inside privacy as well. So that's how they lived, and he lived here and worked here for 12 years. 12 years without seeing his family, his children. He came back to India into Punjab in 1962. He had to come back to Punjab. He had to come back because there was an issue with his army pension at that time. So he wasn't receiving his pension that was due, and he had to go back and fight that case in the court, which meant he had to travel back, but then also was an opportunity to see his family and his children. For my grandmother, my grandmother's brother, it's a very fond memory. And at this stage, my grandmother was maybe she was about 17, 18. And my grandfather, her younger brother, was, I think, in grade 7. At that time, obviously, communication was via letters. And I remember him mentioning to me fondly that they would get very excited at school when they would receive a letter from their father. So it would come to their school, they would get very excited, and I can only imagine what thoughts they would have had. They must have thought, what would our father look like and what would he sound like? What Papaji had done is he didn't tell the children when he came back. He knew which train went to where. He got off India, caught the train to Delhi, then caught the one to Punjab. He found his way around. He didn't tell anyone. And he found out what time my grandmother and grandfather, what time they get off school. So he decided he'd just go surprise them. He stood there waiting for them to finish at 3 o'clock, and my grandma and her brother, then they were riding along, and my grandma told me that she sort of recognized, but she wasn't quite sure it was him or not. And then when she got closer, then she realized that's actually her father. Then they were just in so much shock and awe, and obviously it would have been a very emotional time for them. Then they just embraced each other, and after seeing each other for 10, 12 years. So that was a very happy time for them. I remember grandma talking about how excited they were to see, what's our dad brought from Australia, what gifts has he bought for us. And even another story my grandfather was telling me was because it was such a big deal in their village as well, that the father has come back to the family, that all the neighbors and stuff were just as excited as well. And even one of the neighbors was asking Papaji that, did you come from New Australia or Old Australia? And the reason why they had this confusion was because on the postcodes when the letters would come, one would say Queensland. So because obviously the language barrier, they assumed QLD meant OLD, and then New South Wales meaning new. So they had this misconception that there was two Australias. So just little things like that. Everyone was very intrigued. What's Australia like? And then he spent a total of 9 months there before he came back to Australia. In that time, he did some renovation of their house, did up the house a little bit, and then got his pension issues sorted within the courts as well. So he got that all sorted, and then decided obviously go back to Australia where he's now working. At that time, he tried getting a passport made for his eldest son. He eventually then came a year after. Papaji went back to Brisbane 1964. Then my grandfather Bhupinder Singh Thakkar came 1965 via plane. So then met up with them as well. So yeah, they came back, and then Papaji came back to a job he thought he had, but wasn't there anymore. Had to look for other work, and he actually got a job in the Brisbane City Council as a foreman, and he was well respected and sort of seen as a neutral man. So the way Papaji told the family was that, like, at that time, was thinking 65, 66, leading up to 1970, a lot of different communities had sort of now migrated into Brisbane, and there's a big Italian background. There was a few other ethnicities there as well at that time. A lot of people from Europe. So what he used to tell us was they used to fight a lot amongst each other at work, because our Papaji was the only Indian man, the only brown man. He was seen as the neutral person to sort of calm everyone down and sort of the patient one. They put him forward for that, and so he worked as a foreman in the Brisbane City Council. Then also he was made a union rep, which I didn't know until recently as well. So he did that for a little bit, and then in that time, his youngest son, then he got his passport and he got his youngest son out as well. My grandmother hadn't come because at that time, 1966, she got married to my grandfather, and then my grandfather was living in England at that time. So then my grandfather moved to England, lived in London, and they only came to Australia afterwards. I think it was before 1980. He did that job for a little bit. Then there was an idea where they wanted to get into farming. Our ancestral background have all been farmers in Punjab, and there was a business venture here where they thought they'll get into the farming, agriculture business here in Brisbane at that time. So I think it was like a real estate agent had come to them with this really good offer to sell up their house that they had in Salisbury. And because my papaji, our great-grandfather, he didn't know that much English, he sort of trusted the man, and they cashed out. But then they found out afterwards that real estate agent actually then sold it later for a much larger profit as well. So, but that's life anyway. So then they had this cash, and then they decided to invest in a chicken farm in the Redlands area. Initially, they struggled a little bit. I think there was about $12,000 that they tried to generate that they were short on. So initially, there was a bit of hardship there, but with Papaji's background and his resilience, he fought through that as well. He was a tough worker all his life. From then and onwards, then they had a very successful farming business. Over time, then that grew. And then they were able to settle here. And then from there, my grandmother came on a family visit with my grandfather, my dad, and my auntie from England. They loved Australia compared to England. And then they decided a couple of years later that they're going to move out here as well. Hence, my father then growing up here. And then from that, then obviously myself, my younger brother. Then, we were born in Brisbane as well. While Papaji was in Australia, working between that 1952 to 1962 period, obviously it was hard for him getting himself work in a foreign country, but it's important to understand the difficulties the family at home were also in, and in particular my great-grandmother raising two boys without their father is no easy task. What we've been told is that even just the villages and just the wider community would sometimes give them hardship. They would even tease my Papaji's sons, my grandfathers, that your father has gone to Australia now. He's probably going to come back and turn into a white man. That was like a joke that they would say to them to hurt their feelings, obviously. But there was a trend amongst some of the travelers from Punjab who at that time may have lost their faith going into a different environment and being away from their roots and then coming back. Hence the teasing that your father could easily do that. He could lose his beard and his turban, which is obviously a huge identity and everything for our religion. These are the sort of comments they heard, but they withstood all of that and had the resilience to get through those hard years. 1960s, 1970s, there wasn't a big presence here. Seeing a turban man would have been very strange, very odd, because that wasn't a common thing to see at that time. The things that would have kept our forefathers firm in their religious beliefs is that resilience, and just for my great-grandfather in particular, just the hardships that he did go through sort of formed the foundation of what he was. The hardships of war, the hardships of partition would have been insignificant to perhaps racial abuse or discrimination as a minor thing in the bigger scheme of things he has seen in his life. So I would think that he had that resilience and he had that willpower, that he overcame obstacles when they came like that. My father often talks about in my great-grandfather, my papaji, in his elderly stages and stuff, the memories he has of him was he was a very staunch believer. I would never miss his prayers. He would always do his prayers. He would never miss the Sikh prayers that we do in the morning and in the afternoon. So he'd always have his prayer book, and that was something important to him as well. The fact of being alone didn't have a huge impact on his overall core beliefs, I think. Yeah.